Hello, everyone. Welcome back to X-Rays, where knowledge meets inspiration in the intricate dance of industry evolution. I'm Miles, your host, and join me as we spotlight a special returning guest to reflect both the gravity of AI, risk management, and his visionary leadership. This might just challenge a few assumptions and even raise a few eyebrows, particularly if you've recently jumped headfirst into the AI hype pool. Because our guest, he didn't just review AI adoption, he pulled the plug, audited the wires, and rewired the way his organization approaches all forms of automated decision making. He knows that good governance is a business model, and for so many decades, he's been the cornerstone in the field of international education, certification, and corporate sustainability. And his legacy is definitely built on one principle: excellence that doesn't compromise integrity. Now, in a bold move that bucks the trend, he's led ACI Global and e-Quip through a full-scale review of AI, machine learning, and automated decision-making tools, ultimately deciding to step away from them. And to know the reason behind this, I'm welcoming back to our show the perennial truth teller, Managing Director and CEO of ACI Global and e-Quip, Ian Erskine. Hi, Ian.
And good morning once again. And it's lovely to see that infectious smile of yours.
Thank you.
And yes, and looking forward to being able to share the knowledge, I guess, to our viewers. And that's something we were talking about before we came on air. And that's what the ability of this all is. And I would shudder to think if on the other side of this, yourself sitting there was a robot and I'm a robot, and I wouldn't really want to go down that path. So
No, yeah.
yes, yes.
Well, it's always an honor to have you back on X-Rays, Ian. You bring clarity in a world that often confuses noise with innovation. And I've got to say, while most companies are racing to automate everything in sight, your recent decision to step back from AI is really bold. But knowing you, it's not without strategic insight. And I learned that your recent executive review revealed major updates related to AI, machine learning, and ADM. So, could you please share with us what triggered this reevaluation and what kind of risk or maybe red flags pushed you to remove these technologies from your digital platforms?
Well, I guess it very rapidly came to a head when we trialed it on both our websites, ACI Global and e-Quip. We actually taught it to actually, because the machine can't do it itself. You've got to give it that information to actually provide you that information back. And that's where well, for me, it became quite scary, because when I was putting the question, after I'd put the question, I was putting the question to the chatbot who was talking back to me. And I'm thinking, my God, this is me talking here. And I'm actually talking to myself on the other side of the screen. So it was, not only was that quite scary, but I then went back and then had a look at the nuts and bolts of this, which is the knowledge which you have to share and have to provide, right? And then we started to run into problems with that knowledge being mixed up when it was coming back to us in its real form. So then we then began to question that, right? Now this was midway through last year. So we then looked at the update standards to AI and also information security. And what I very quickly realised was the standards that had actually been produced and opened up to the market weren't keeping pace with actually the technology. So that then led me to think, well, okay, we have to stop. We have to consider where this is going. And to do that, I didn't want to keep the machines running on both our websites. So we removed them completely. And that's when we had significant feedback, which we were able to go back and review. And simply the feedback was, Ian, we want to be able to speak to you in person. We
Yes.
know some cases where Yolanda and all her students over in South Africa, they actually sometimes want to actually see me by camera and things like that, and we sit down together and discuss things.
Mhm.
And And the other side of this, as I've just mentioned, with Yolanda and Marcus and Hannes over in New Zealand, all these people have a collective experience of knowledge which is being transferred back to the candidate and from the candidate back to ourselves. And we all remark it's
Mm-hmm.
quite often that we actually learn from our candidates, but the ability of all of us, the specific four people I've just mentioned, the collective knowledge which we have the ability to share on a person-to-person basis cannot be measured, cannot be transferred to a machine, of which we
Mm-hmm.
talk about AI, automated decision making, and machine learning. It
Yeah.
simply can't be. So we then, as I said, we did an executive review. We looked at the changes to the standards, where this was all being pushed, and said, no, we were going to make it a stand. And it really came to a head when one of our major clients decided to leave and embrace machine learning. And when I put a series of questions to them, that really hit home to me. And it did. It literally hurt me personally to think that they could. And I am firmly convinced that it has not really been properly thought through, the decision that they made, and they've
Mm-hmm.
gone to machine learning. And to me, it just horrifies me because, like I said before, you can't usurp the collective experience of people like myself
Mm-hmm.
and others,
Yeah.
right? And as we discussed before we came on air, there would be millions of people like myself who want to be able to move through into retirement and create the legacy, but you can't create that legacy by
Mm-hmm.
handing that over to a machine.
Yeah, yeah, right. You know, in this era where shiny tools often win over judgment or sober judgment, hearing your process, Ian, is refreshing. And this for me doesn't sound like an anti-tech. It's rather pro-responsibility. And decisions like that don't happen in a vacuum. So how did your internal risk assessment and compliance frameworks, particularly those reflected in ISO clauses stated in your website, like 4.1 and 6.1, help shape that decision to pivot away from AI and focus on more measured, tested approaches?
Well, that's where it became very easy because, as we've discussed before, the ISO framework basically is a generic set of guidelines, non-mandatory, right? So organisations accept them into guiding them into their business systems framework, and
Uh,
that's what we did. We looked at 4.1 and looked at internal and external issues, and we went back to the very basics and simply said with regarding the platform where AI and everything is, do we know enough about them that we can actually hand on heart say, well, okay, if we need that information back, or if we understand the algorithms correctly, can we make changes to that and things like that in
mhm,
our own business system? And the answer simply came back, no, we can't. There's no control over that. So, in actual fact, you're handing that control over to a platform. The
mhm,
risk goes from something where you previously had control, and that's what we did. We then put it through the risk assessment process and had a look and said, well, is that risk foreseeable?
mhm.
And the simple fact is incredibly seeable. You could see where the risks are, right?
Yeah.
And then you can also look at the unforeseen risks in reference to the generation from the algorithms back to machine learning and automated decision making to the point where mistakes will happen. And then you have to say to yourself, well, okay, so now it's back to foreseeable where you have to do something.
Mhm,
And that's what we did. We put that through our generic business management framework, married that off against a set of guidelines from ISO 4.1, 4.2, Section 5, where we talk about the compliance governance of the whole business, right? Then looked at people and the involvement of people in this whole process. And when you go back and talk about people, that's where it all starts. As you know, a business cannot perform unless it has the right people that are trained, capable, and demanding meritocracy. And that's basically, in a nutshell, that's where we got to. And we said, right, we have to go back to where we originally were, people
Mhm.
focused, customer focused, organizational focused, and then and that's where we've now settled on. And now, as I said, our alliance with Surf which gives us our global reach, right? Where
Mhm.
anyone, and it's a simple fact because you can put what you like on a website, but then you've got to put yourself in the other person's shoes and ensure that they understand and can answer and get the right questions. So what we're simply saying is don't even have a second thought about it. Just pick up the phone, give us a ring, and then we can bring you in line with either myself or others around the world to speak through real issues not being generated from a machine.
Like having a reliable guide when others are busy chasing bots, directions built by algorithms. But beyond frameworks, Ian, this touches trust, which is something deeper. And ACI Global has always led with people over platforms. And I know that very well. So, with AI off the table, how are you reinforcing trust, security, and data protection for your clients, especially with global standards like GDPR, SOC 2, and the Australian Privacy Act tightening the reins?
I'll say again, this is where our journey's taken us to the common sense approach, and
Uh-huh.
then you've then got to sit back as a business and ask yourself the question, okay, if there is something comes adrift and certain information goes astray, and the worst possible case is if that information lands in the dark web and then that's used against a person, right? There is no way I can sit here as the managing director of ACI Global and say, I am not responsible because I am responsible for every one of the candidates that come into our LMS, our learning management system. I'm responsible from the moment that person picks up the phone and makes an inquiry and speaks to me personally, right? I am then responsible for the information I'm partaking or passing on to that person, right? So I have to do everything in my ability to protect that information, right? And that's what all this is about, is to protect that information, to get that open and transparent process really activated. So for argument's sake, and I say this to everyone, when someone comes on into a course and I'm their facilitator, I say, be prepared to enjoy yourself
Mhm.
because we want you to enjoy that journey, right? And
Yeah,
I challenge them. I say to my candidate, look, if you think I'm being a goose, tell me so. Because what might surprise you as we go through this learning journey, I learn so much from my candidates,
Mhm.
and that enhances my ability to hand back
To help
because
others.
yeah, because and what's the I used to say to my old dog Smoker, you're never too old, and you've taught me, I we are never too old to learn new tricks.
I agree. Like a dog, like an old dog.
Yes, yes,
Yes.
yes,
And I always like your common sense approach, Ian. We're absolutely speaking the same language. Because aside from preventing problems, governance is also about earning confidence day in and day out. And when trust is your brand, that pays more than just an AI shortcut. And it's
yes.
clear from your review that your belief in human-led learning has only grown stronger and stronger. How has this renewed commitment impacted ACI Global's core services like your e-campus delivery and facilitator training, and how are clients responding to this people-first model?
Well, it's now going right back to basics because our experience with Surf Corp has very quickly taught us that this is what people want. They want that
Yes.
one-on-one discussion basis. They don't want to be dictated to by algorithms and automated decision making. They want to be able to speak one on one. And look, the world is a big place, so we do have to embrace video technology so that we can actually, like we're doing here, right? But again, as you know, one of the keys to this is, and one of the keys that I always try to let everyone know is, when you're listening to a question, for argument's sake, from yourself, right? I look at your eyes, I look at your facial reactions and the way you ask me that question,
Mhm.
right? And then I would expect the same from you when I'm giving you the answer.
Yeah.
You're looking at my facial mannerisms, the way I answer the question, and things like that. And this is how we now have to understand modern communication. Right? Now, obviously, the next step to that, where we take that, is when a person finishes going through their course, we actually have to go to the next step and actually be there in person to watch them actually undertaking some of their tasks, which then demonstrates to us that yes, they are indeed now capable, and capable for that merit, which is a pay rise, right, or pay packet, which will be in commensurate of the training that they have taken. Okay, because very much so, it's very much, and this is where again I don't want people to think that we're anti-innovation. We
Yes.
are certainly not anti-innovation. And I think
Mhm.
they've only got to have a look at our website and say, wow, I can speak to anyone at any time right around the world with Servcorp, right? And if that's not innovation, I don't know, right? And like I said, we then put within our platform the ability to speak constantly one-on-one with all our candidates, and for them to be part of that journey.
Yeah, right. And we have to responsibly choose which innovation to actually use. And, this is what I love. And I always have this perception about you, Ian. You don't just talk about lifelong learning, you architect it. While some are trying to replace humans, you're doubling down on their value. And as I told you before we started this podcast, that's legacy right there. Definitely resonates. So, now that digital transformation continues its sprint, many organizations feel pressured, follow trends just to stay relevant. What's your advice to leaders trying to balance innovation with responsible governance, especially when it comes to deciding whether to adopt or reject tools like AI and ADM?
Well, to me, it's not a hard question to ask. All I do, and I'm now doing this when I'm going around doing my third party audits, is asking people to put their hand on their hearts and say, when you speak to your children or your grandchildren, because inevitably they're going to ask you the question. And I've had the question asked me, Poppy, how would it be if I stepped up and I became a facilitator in some of your courses, right? And I've got to be man enough to be able to say, well, yes, there's certainly going to be room for that in our platform because it's human centric. It
Mhm.
reflects your views plus the views of the person on the other side who's your mentor or facilitator, right? And it all is dealing with people's personal information. So we're dealing with people by people to people, not
Mhm.
machine trying to replace people. And that's where we have to go back to the very basics of all this. And if we step back and look at how AI has evolved, the idea of AI originally was a fantastic idea. Okay.
Yeah.
And in some respects, there is a role where some of this technology can be used to allow people to work smarter, right?
Mhm.
But I challenge people, yeah, that's fine, right? But never put yourself in a position where that software is going to dictate to you how
Mhm.
you fulfill your role.
Mhm.
Because if you allow that to happen, ultimately you're simply saying to the software, oh, the software is better than I am. You might as well pack up, retire, and go home.
Yeah, right. I agree. I mean,
And
we
and
have to
and
make the
that's what we
judgment here.
Yeah, and that's what we must always remember is people matter. And
Mm-hmm.
if people matter and we live by that motto, we have to say, hold on a minute, we don't want this maniac push to continue. Stop, consider where we're at, because what's happening at the moment, and we're about to make a major submission to the federal government in reference to AI, automated decision making, and machine learning. They have 26 recommendations, right? Now,
Mm-hmm.
every single one of those recommendations is draconian. It's basically the government coming in and putting rules and regulations to dictate our lives. What I'm ultimately saying, hey guys, let's take control of this ourselves. We'll put a stoppage on it at this stage, right? Let us consider how we manage this process. And if we manage the process correctly, and ACI has clearly demonstrated how we can manage it within a learning management system, right? We've demonstrated quite clearly how that can work and will continue to work and will continually improve. You don't need to allow it to be fully taken over by a machine.
Mhm. Well said. Not every shiny button needs pressing, or not every business needs to disrupt to deliver value. And I thought sometimes the smartest move is not to move until you know why. That's just me.
That is so brilliant, brilliantly put. And I would ask everyone just to memorize what you just said, because that is key to moving forward.
Thank you, Ian. Well, there you have it, guys. I have to clear that this episode wasn't about bashing innovation. It's about elevating discernment. Sometimes saying no to tech can be the most powerful business decision a leader can make, especially when that no is grounded in risk awareness, compliance, and a deep commitment to people. So, Ian, thank you so much, as always, for showing us
Absolute
strategic
pleasure.
leadership really looks like. I look forward to having another interesting topic with you.
Yes, thank you so much again. And again, continue that infectious smile.
Thank
And
you.
I look forward to our next interview.
Thank you, Ian. And folks, if this conversation sparked a rethink in your own business, you can connect with Ian and his team via aciglobal.com.au or click the link below. And we're also dropping the link to their EOMS manual, which is updated to reflect all current ISO clause changes. Thank you for watching. Thank you for thinking. And as always, thanks for keeping us alive and kicking. Ian and I will definitely come back. This has been your host, Miles. Stay focused and inspired with X-Rays.